This is a little bit of a reinvention of the SEO for the Rest of Us podcast. I feel like I did the traditional B2B tour of interviews where it's like every B2B podcast, marketing podcast, we all interview the same like 50 people.
Yeah.
And then we all go like, what the hell?
Yeah.
What do we do now? And then the shows peter out after like a year or two because they just run out of people to interview and they're not sure what to do. And one of the things that I realized in my own journey for SEO is that I've learned the most about SEO by talking to people not in my industry. And don't get me wrong, like I'm a part of Traffic Think Tank and I have my own SEO community, SEO for the Rest of Us, like a lot of value there. But I think after a certain point, like if you want to be creative with our work and not be robotic and everything else, you have to, the conclusion I came to reading your guides and everything was literally, I wrote down like, this is a show about SEO where we spend most of our time talking to a diverse group of people outside the SEO industry, which is different than anything else. I want to start. So thank you for that inspiration. Number one, this has meant a lot. Like your work's useful. Yeah. Your work's meant a lot to me. So I'm excited to have you on. I want to talk to you about somebody who means a lot to you. I remember hearing, I think it was on the Casted podcast. You said you don't believe in having heroes, and then you immediately hedged and you're like, but Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
And he had written, I came up doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there was a time when he got really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was like, that's cool. And it got me into his stuff. Such a weird connection. There's probably like a very small number of people that connected to him through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he wrote something, I think it's like the most beautiful piece about Chicago, about how Chicago, which is where I'm from, is like the last, I think he says it's like the last bastion of like no bullshit. And I loved it. It's wonderful. It's how I just steal pieces of that every time I describe where I live.
Yeah.
And one of the things I noticed, like you took a lot of stuff from him, and you ended one of your episodes in maybe like 2018 with a quote about him, like how cooking helped him learn to love something so fleeting. And it's so temporary. Like you love this thing and then it's gone. It's somebody else's.
The golden moment quote.
And I've always felt like, so SEO is in blogs and everything can be a publication or a library, but for SEO purposes, your content is very much a library, right? It's meant to be discoverable. People should be able to enter at any point. They should be able to find the resource they need through Google. But I guess I'm really curious, like, where do you settle on that, especially with your focus on podcasting? Like, should articles be a library? Should they be a publication? Should they be both? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so first of all, it's crazy you dug up that quote because it doesn't mean a lot to me, and his storytelling style means a lot to me too. And I've tried to learn from it. I have very, very, very many miles to go yet. But anyways, we spend a lot of time in marketing talking about containers and tools. So a blog is a container, a blog post is a container, podcast is a container, an episode is a container. You might also say it's a tool. Very rarely are we going to say, do hammers work? But we often ask, do podcasts work? It's weird, right? It's like, well, it's just, here's an option. Here's a thing that you could use. What are you trying to build? Why? For whom? How will you know it's working? Like design thinking 101 is who is this for? What is it for? How will we know that it's working? So if you can answer those questions, then I can tell you, oh, okay, so your blog will probably end up looking like a library. Like you want it to just be like a repository of content that like you update over time, but you go big swaths of time without touching that material. Or, oh, no, your blog is like super timely and relevant and like it's going to have like a short shelf life per piece, but like that's the intent of the whole thing. It could be anything. There are people who will thrive doing it one way and people who will thrive doing it the exact opposite way. So what I'd like us to stop doing is sort of like we obsess over absolutes too much in marketing. There are none. It's always, it depends. And so what we're better off doing is getting really, really good at trying to figure out how we answer our own it depends situation.
So how do you answer that for yourself or for people in marketing showrunners? Like, what's the process for answering that for them? Like if somebody came to you with that question and maybe they're coming with the lens of like, they've been shoulded into SEO. Like we all get shoulded into stuff. You should have a podcast. You should do SEO, whatever, anything, right? You should add conversational marketing to your website.
Right.
How do you answer that question? Like, where do you start thinking that through?
So we're really, really bad at creating goals, because in marketing, especially modern marketing, our goals and our measures get conflated. So there's this concept called Goodhart's law, which states that when a measure becomes a goal, it ceases to be a good measure. So a goal in marketing sounds like grow the blog 30%. That's not a goal. That's a measure. What's your real goal? The way you tell if you're tracking towards the goal is the growth of the blog, right? So you're far better saying, over the next 30 days, we'd like to solve this problem that marketers have with podcasts or whatever you write about. Or we'd like to create the world's most entertaining, or, however you describe it, blog about brands who podcasts, right? So, okay, those are good goals. Or let's show the world how fun and relevant we are. Let's help people find and share their voices and make shows that make a difference. That's the marketing showrunner's goal. Those are goals. How do you measure your progress towards the goal? Well, there's a number of ways to measure it. Probably not one way. Here's a list of some, and maybe we can force rank it. Okay, growth of the blog, the velocity at which people move from reading to subscribing, the open rates of that email list, the velocity at which they move from subscribe to taking a workshop with us, the amount of people who read the blog, and in our entrance survey, we always ask how you found the workshop or how you found one of our products. Like, okay, the amount of people who say that the blog drove them here, great. Or that they read the blog as part of their overall consumption to us. The LTV, the cost of customer acquisition, all this stuff, those are measures. So goals and measures are incredibly important to iron out. Goals sound like, what change are you trying to make? And measures, as the word implies, are metrics. And we're really, really bad at understanding the goal part. So as a result, we get shoulded to death because we don't actually know what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do essentially comes back to one idea, which is more or faster, more or faster or cheaper. It's just that it's an infinite race to nowhere. We don't know what we're actually trying to do. We don't know our actual goals. So we get shoulded to death because we're not firm and confident in saying like, oh, okay, Brendan's telling me to do one thing, Jay's telling me to do another, but our goal is this. So I know how to vet those possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's super smart. I think that the closer you get to that, the closer you get to another one of your ideas that I want to kind of touch on, which is creating content that keeps people coming back. I think in SEO, everything gets super robotic and it can become, I mean, we've all read those blogs, right? Like this is one of the things that makes big blogs with a lot of voices, but they're trying for one feel. So it can come off as HubSpot, G2, like a lot of these blogs, it's like, I just wish you had more of a take. I wish you had a voice. I wish you were like putting your flag in the ground on something. I think this is why Drift did really well early on. They were like willing to take a stand, even on things that nobody cared. Like they made up death to forms. There was not like a really big movement of people that were like, oh, I really wish somebody would fix forms. But they were willing to like take a stand on something and find something to fight back against. And I think if I were to put this in an SEO lens, this is when you Google a topic plus the person you want to hear from. I do this a lot. I'm notorious. I joke with, I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Jarvis. He's written some really great books and created some cool tech products. I Google a lot of things plus Paul Jarvis because I'm like, does he have an article on this? Has he talked about it? I want to know his take. And if you look in his search console, I guarantee there's all sorts of like phrase plus his name. And I'm like, Paul, that's me. Sorry. I think that's like when you create the content that keeps people coming back, right? I want to talk about three things you kind of outlined as like content that keeps people coming back.
Okay.
And I guess before I talk about those, let's take one step back. We need to talk about the why behind this, because it's very easy to make a podcast where you're like, all right, it's guest plus topic. Like, here's my topic. I'm going to do SEO and here's my guest. I did that for however many episodes I've already released. We're not doing that anymore. I want to create the kind of content and have the kind of conversations and things that keep people coming back, not just because it's different, like different is better than better, but why is it so important to create that content that keeps people coming back and to be somebody's favorite?
So so many directions we can go here. Different is better than better. Refreshing is better than better. Different means you can pull a stunt and be different. So I could give a keynote speech with my back to the audience. I'm different than every speaker on planet Earth, but nobody wants to hire me. right? So like we get caught up in finding some kind of cheap gimmick and we like slap that on. We want to pour chocolate over a pile of crap. It's like, maybe you should have a better product underneath it than have some kind of gimmick that makes it better. Like, don't be the hot ones of marketing where you have like marketing executives answer the same questions and you're talking to the same guests, but they have to eat spicy wings on your show and not elsewhere. Like, use your show or any content to actually say something that matters. Like, that's the first hurdle. It's like, say something that matters. So yes, I think the goal is to be their favorite. And what favorite implies is not great in some objective sense. It implies personal. It implies an irrational bias towards you. My favorite basketball team is the New York Knicks. For those keeping score at home, they are also the worst basketball team. Think about that for a second. My favorite is the worst in the category, not the number one, not, we rank number one on this review site that is in no way possibly gamed, right? Like, no, the worst team is my favorite. My favorite podcast, you could point out, hey, there's a competitor show that's better. Why are they better? A bigger named host or better guests or economically or academically more sound or the audio quality is whatever. I don't care. This one's my favorite. Irrational personal bias. So that show is irreplaceable in my life. That's where we want to be, I think. We don't want to be an interchangeable part. And so much of SEO and blogging and content creation is like, what can we create a marginally better replaceable part? You could find this from anyone, but find it from us first, right? That's a race to the bottom. And there's no lasting compounding value. So what you want is lasting compounding value. Better said, when you're not trying to transact your audience, you want to be their favorite. You want to be their personal and preferred pick for a specific purpose. So how do we do that? Well, I actually think it starts by developing some kind of premise for what you have to say. Like the problem with the blogs you point out is they're like messy quilts that like pick up a bunch of scraps and stitch it all together, and they don't have a point of view that holds it all together. Like, there's a very simple way to develop premises for your show, but it affects any project. A publication, which a blog is, a newsletter, a speech. I call it the XY premise pitch. It runs like this. This is a project about X, but unlike other projects about X, only we Y. So this is a project about topics, unlike other similar projects, insert thing here, about those topics, only we hook. And so a premise is not just what you explore, it's also how you explore it. And very few marketers and marketing teams think critically about how do we uniquely explore this versus others. So then they get shoulded to death because they're like, what does one, in some general sense, I'm using air quotes for the podcast listeners here, what does one do to write about this topic in a way that ranks on search? Well, one needs to act like everybody else. One needs to copy the generality or the average, right? So there's too much averaging out. You're kind of like smoothing the edges and you look like everyone else. You're a commodity. The way you stop acting like a commodity is you realize the topics aren't enough. That's not differentiating. What you explore, lots of other people explore it. How you explore it, that's differentiating. That's refreshing. That can feel personal. And that gives like people a reason why they'd care. So the premise you developed is so important because it informs every piece that now you think about when you think about marketing and growth and SEO and all these things. So this is a project, blog, podcast, newsletter, brand about X, but unlike other projects about X, only we Y. Really try to answer that question and you're well on the path.
A point of clarification that I love that you make in some of your work is when we say, but only we Y, we're not talking about the gimmick, right? We're not trying to be hot ones, which is funny because hot ones is interesting because of the gimmick. It's also because Sean Evans asks amazing questions.
Oh, yeah.
Like one of the best interviewers ever.
Table stakes today is it is well built, right? Like we agonize over relevancy. Relevancy means you exist. People don't pay attention to irrelevant experiences. They don't even notice them, right? So congratulations, you exist. Relevancy is not the goal. Neither is actually being enjoyable because you're not going to consume things that are unenjoyable. You have infinite choice. So being relevant, being enjoyable, these are table stakes, but being refreshing, which is like different plus welcome, like different and good, being refreshing and being personal. Yeah, that helps. It's refreshing to hear Sean Evans talk about some story from the childhood of the celebrity guest because it's not found elsewhere. His research really does the heavy lifting. But here's the thing. At the same time, their hook is a gimmick. It's unlike other shows that interview celebrities, only we ask those celebrities to eat progressively more spicy wings as we ask them hotter and hotter questions. And so that fits. That is differentiating, but it's also relevant to their brand, because Hot Ones is hosted on a channel called First We Feast, which is about the intersection of pop culture and food. So they are saying something that matters. They're like, we go deeper. We have hotter takes. We actually care about the intersection of food. Here's the wings, and pop culture. Here's the celebrity guest. You sell a SaaS product for marketers, and now you're asking your guests to eat spicy wings. Like, you're missing an opportunity to like own an idea in the minds of your audience, to actually say something that matters.
Yeah, I think it's really easy. You see the rise of other podcasts, like especially on networks like Barstool Sports and stuff, where it's like, all right, we're going to do what they do. They've got a couple gimmicks. They have a couple I forget what they're called, but like segments that repeat every episode, and those are cool. So we're going to have segments, and let's just do the ones they do. Let's spin the wheel, and we'll have the hot wings, and we'll just do all the things we see everywhere else. And I think the biggest thing that people miss when they focus on the gimmicks is figuring out who you're really for. And I think that's a big problem in SEO, because if you ask who people are for, they'll make something up because somebody has told them they need to do some sort of audience like profile or avatar or whatever. But really the only people they're doing things for is whoever Googles this. I'm going to write, like you said, the copycat generic content, try and get on the first page. And my audience is whoever happens to Google these things. But when you're for everybody, you're kind of for nobody, right?
Yeah, I mean, or you're trying to be a top 40. Trying to be a top 40 hit. You're trying to be Miley Cyrus. Like, it's not like, just know what you are. Like, if you're trying to be top 40 hit, if you want a quick injection of fame, just know the game you're playing. You're going to compete with everybody else trying to do the same thing. People will very quickly leave you for someone else. It's a what have you done for me lately kind of thing. There's really not a long-term play there. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a reason top 40 artists that stop doing the bubblegum stuff. They start changing their mode. They start reinventing, because either they're trying to trend hop and triage or arbitrage their way into a career because they're just following trends, or they're like, I can't do this cookie cutter bullshit anymore, so I'm going to now move into doing this more edgy thing, right? And then their hardcore fans go with them and they lose the top 40 standing. So, and let me ask you this, Brendan, because I spend zero time thinking about SEO. It's just not what has interested me. I started my career at Google. That left me hating all things search. So, which I'm happy to talk about. But yes, I can't stand it. I'm here to make stuff. I want to make what matters. That's why I'm here talking to you. I like doing that stuff. And that's all I want to think about. And that's the only types of people I want to talk to, such as yourself. So I'll ask you this. When you're trying to make a difference, when you're trying to push people to think better about something or improve something or whatever, like, where does SEO fall? Because for my money, SEO is like, I'm going to try to pander to existing demand. But like, I think really inspiring leaders and teams, like really powerful, transformative experiences, they don't just like hand you answers you're already seeking. They give you things you didn't even know to ask for. So it's like some of the, like Anthony Bourdain, like I wouldn't know how to Google for the experiences that he gave me that radically helped in a very practical way all of my career, just by like learning from him and studying him and all that stuff. So like the most powerful experiences aren't these like quick Google searches, because like I don't know what to even say. So how I'm struggling to ask this without I don't want to offend people here. My intent is good because I want to understand.
Offend away.
Okay. How is writing content for search anything more than pandering to existing demand and not pushing people to be better than what they already know to ask?
So a couple thoughts. Number one, it's a super fair question. I ask myself on a regular basis, do I believe in SEO because it's effective? Is it effective because I believe in, there's like a lot of like circular reasoning, right? Sure. Is it the best because it's what I do for a living and currently my career depends on it? I don't know. Do I defend it as like a channel? First of all, I think I've matured a lot. Like SEO is just a marketing channel. For a long time when I was immature, it was the marketing channel, and I would argue. Now it's like I've worked with enough $100 million, $1 billion companies that have never done SEO, and they're multi-billion dollar companies. I'm like, oh, I understand my place in the world. It is not that important. You can build businesses. You can put things out into the world that matter in a lot of different ways. What I think is most interesting for me in SEO, and I think that what's kind of making like my take on it unique, is less focus on content, more focus on intent. Like somebody's Googling a phrase. but in their heart of hearts, what do they want? They're Googling, this is an example I use a lot, digital marketing skills. Okay, so I sell a digital marketing course. I should rank for digital marketing skills. They'll buy my course. They'll opt in for my newsletter. Great, but what do they really want? Well, if you look at the autocomplete for searches like that are digital marketing skills for resume, digital marketing skills for job, digital marketing skills 2020. Okay, so these are people who want to change their life with digital marketing skills. I can't skyscraper this and make, 150 digital marketing skills. That doesn't help that person. It's about creating, like, having a take, which is why I want to talk to you, because I know it's something you believe in. Having something to say is like my number one rule.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping to do here, and what I hope that SEO for the rest of us does, is I guess two things. Number one, demystifies it enough that people don't feel intimidated by SEO and they feel like they can play in that arena.
Huge.
Second of all, the people who do have something to say, I want to give them the tools to rise above the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm tired of the copycat content. I'm tired of the industry that I work in, the content that's out there in a lot of different places. Everything from like working out to business to, whatever, whether it's, what are the big three, like fashion and beauty, relationships, and money. A lot of that content is not good. And I want to help the people if they can make I focus on SEO as like being discoverable. If I can help the people who actually have something to say. Now, not everybody has to be Seth Godin. I don't read Seth Godin's blog anymore, honestly, Jay, because I can't afford to rethink my life every morning. Like too many, right? Like too many times I'm reading his blog and I'm like, I'm not generous enough. What am I like? I need 30 minutes just to process this.
See, I like that stuff because it's not prescriptive, because it's not what I call like transactional content. So that's what plagues me and my kind of bias against or hold up with SEO, but mostly it's a lot of marketing. It's not SEO, it's marketing. We're trying to transact the world. So we create transactional content, which means like the best possible situation. If you write transactional content, it's just a quick injection of an answer or information. The best situation, the best case scenario is your audience doesn't need it because they already know it. The second best case scenario is that we are able to invent those chairs from the Matrix. You remember those? Like in the movie The Matrix, they just like plug in something into the back of their brain, and then Keanu Reeves wakes up 10 seconds later and he's like, I know Kung Fu. That's the next best scenario. And so where does like consuming our content, where does spending time with us, where's developing a relationship with us, where's actually going deep with us, where's caring about us and not our competitors or whatever, coming on a journey with us, that's way at the other end. That's a worst case scenario. You're like, hold on, you're going to ask me to spend 30 minutes with a podcast. Better is the article, better is the checklist, better is the Matrix chair, better is I already know all this information, right? So it's like there's like a consumption preference spectrum that we can plot our work on. And when all we do is create transactional content, which is like question, answer, quick injection of information. When all we're doing is shipping commodities, actually the best case scenario is something they don't have to spend any time with at all. And for my money, time spent is the only way to develop a relationship with people.
I remember hearing you say that shows are about trust and love. I think that the best blogs, the best writing is about the same thing.
Absolutely. And I think we're too focused on the tip of the spear. We're too focused on the headline in the first few paragraphs. We're not focused on the body enough. We're not focused on what happens when you subscribe. We don't just pepper you with more pieces that are disparate and disconnected. We're going on a journey together. Like we have a position we're taking here. We see a mountain peak in the distance, and our blog is an effort to take steps towards it. Like this is broken, right? You just read this post about whatever. Like we believe this is broken. There's a better way. That was imbued in the article you just read. If you too want to explore this and go deeper, if you too believe in our way of thinking about this, come with us on a deeper journey. Spend some time with us. Like pull up a chair, let's rap, right? Or grab your backpack. We're going hacking through the jungle. And every article is an attempt to hack through that jungle. But what plagues so many people is all they're trying to do is put up lots of those like blocking pads that football practices use, right? They're just trying to put up a lot of pieces everywhere that bump up against where their audience is. And they don't realize like actually what happens next, that matters a ton. It's not just getting people to you, right? Marketing is not about who arrives. It's about who stays. So what's your plan for that?
It's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. Tell me more about how you think about that. That's another thing I heard you talk about on the Casted podcast, where it's not just about, look, SEO can very much be about who arrives. How much traffic am I getting from Google? Zero care. Like, they're coming in from Google. Did they opt in? Did they buy? Did they convert? did they subscribe in the not real sense of like
Yep.
when you subscribe, which I know you believe in, like when I genuinely subscribe to your ideas and your movement and all of the things that you stand for and don't stand for?
Let's talk about that. That's important. Subscription has come to be known as click a button, like in a podcast app, or join a list, like subscribe to a newsletter. Subscription really should mean, and historically meant, I am subscribed to those beliefs. I am subscribed to this journey, this community, this way of viewing the world. That's what we want, right? There's the very transactional view on this, which is because if they are, it's easier to sell stuff. There's also the human way to look at this, which is, well, if we believe the same things, then you're going to stick around. You're going to spend time. We're going to have a relationship, right? And back to the transaction. Oh, by the way, because you're so bought into what we believe, you're going to evangelize this to new people for free. So like, again, the hardcore measure everything kind of marketer, marketing leader, your lifetime value of that audience goes up and your cost of customer acquisition goes down thanks to the word of mouth. When people stick and stay, they take actions on your behalf. Some of those actions look like going deeper with you. So they're more valuable per person, right? Every single person that listens to your show, that reads your blog, that subscribes to your newsletter gets more valuable. Then they go tell other people who arrive for free. Amazing, right? This is not rocket surgery here. You know, this is stuff that we can talk about in plain English language. And we lose sight of it. And I think it's because partly we've lost sight of like, what does subscription actually mean? It's not the technical stuff. It's the idea base. It's the belief based stuff. So we better work really hard to develop and articulate those beliefs and those ideas. So back to a few answers ago, like the XY premise pitch is an attempt for you to quickly articulate, this is what we believe. This is what we do. This is how we explore this stuff. And that's why you should care.
Yeah. Some of the things, if I were to put a couple pins in things I've heard you say, if we want to enforce that like trust and love, if we want people to subscribe, maybe like 3 or 4 pieces, right? Say something that matters. One thing we haven't talked a lot about that I know you've talked about a lot before, which is like getting people to the end, right?
Yeah.
If you're creating a show, you have to get people to the end of it. I would argue the same is true for blogs. People are like, put
Definitely.
the mid-content CTA, and it's like, I get it, but it just, is that really what you want? Like, is that
people, 50% of people drop off 2 paragraphs in. So put a CTA 2 paragraphs in. Fix your fucking writing. Write something that's worth more than 2 paragraphs of time. How about that? And by the way, not only will people get to the CTA, they will also spend way more time with you and love what you have to say and all this cascading good effects. Like, my God, you got me on my soapbox here because it's like, we all know this stuff. Nobody listening is like, no, the point of a blog is you write 2 paragraphs and drop a CTA over their face. Everyone's like, yeah, we want people to read it. But here's the magic here, Brendan. We think about how reach is learnable. SEO, social media distribution, we talk about reach, advertising. Resonance is also learnable. Resonance is a craft. It's a skill. You can learn about what a nut graph is, what an open loop is. You can learn about how to construct an experience that gets people to the end. You know, as simple as on a podcast, somebody saying the word but a little bit more. Because what happens is people go, wait, oh, something new is coming. I better keep listening. It's like, I agree with you to an extent, but that's a way more compelling moment than me saying, I could not agree more. Like in my career, the same thing happened. That's flat. So these things are techniques. These things are craft-driven skills, which is beautiful because us marketers, we love that. Give me the techniques, give me the moves, give me I can learn this. I can learn SEO. It's give me the technical stuff. Cool. You know what? If you go outside of marketing, that's how people approach documentary production. That's how people approach sitcom show running. That's how people approach their novels. This is a craft. Resonance is learnable. So rather than try to elevate the CTA after 2 paragraphs, learn how to resonate in your paragraphs more so people stick around. Because not only will they get to that CTA, but a lot better things will happen because they spent 70 paragraphs with you instead of 2.
Yeah. It's the reason that I would read, your 3, maybe I feel like there's even 4 parts to that series. There's like another one at the end, but I'm reading like, it's on my phone, like not an ideal reading experience, but I'm like on my phone, I'm opening them in separate tabs because I don't want to like lose anything. So I'm opening them in separate tabs. That was my experience recently. I heard you on a podcast. You're like, hey, just Google this, Google our guide to creating a show premise. I do it. It's like, hey, there's also these 3 other articles right at the beginning. You should probably read those first. All right, tab, tab, tab. Cool. And I'm reading through, and the graphics are pulling me through because they're evolving as it, like, again, like another lost art in SEO is like, people just try to put like, they're like, oh, more images because that keeps people reading. No, good images that add value keep people reading. You
Are
putting
you,
more
yeah,
unsplash doesn't actually help anybody.
right. Are you, you're talking about Bob the Magic Wand?
Bob the Magic Wand and your spectrums where like it's all right, so there's like a vertical chart and a horizontal chart, and then you put them together and like, oh crap, that's an XY graph, and then you're like plotting things and there's boxes and quadrants, and it just keeps building. Like I could get a good chunk of the article just by looking at the images as they grow and seeing the progression. But you're
Right.
creating content that gets me, because we're trying to like I'm trying to like not elaborate too much. I'm trying to like wrap up so people can understand. So say something that matters, create content that pulls people through. I'll make sure for everybody who looks at show notes, like I'll make sure we have links to some of this stuff because I think it's fantastic.
Thanks.
But I
Thank
think
you.
that's that, like, construct an experience, right? I use a lot of GIFs. I use a lot of emojis. I have like a very like a blog voice to the degree you can. It's very
Yeah. Yeah.
conversational.
You have a Twitter
But
voice. Like you just have a tone of voice when you share stuff. It's great.
yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
The other 2 things is we talked about avoiding stagnation, right? If every blog is 10,000 words, nobody's coming back to that, right? Like, does
Or
everything need
if
to be?
every, I mean, if every article has a spectrum that builds, if you thought the first 2 were great, which by the way, thank you. If I do 16 more in a row where it's like, okay, we're building another spectrum today, you're like, this was awesome, but give it a rest, man. Do something different.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, I think about the Wait But Why website, and
Oh,
I
so
forget
good.
his name.
Tim Urban.
Thank you. Tim Urban, like just beautiful, where he's like, yeah, this is not a series. This probably should have been a book, but here's like a bunch of 40. He's like, my computer was shutting down trying to edit this. And I'm like, wow. And he put them in blogs, and it's intimidating and exhausting. But again, like, I'm like, I've never felt this way about content before, honestly, Jay, where I'm like, shit, I should probably sit down and read this.
You know what you're making me think of? This all comes back to the same idea, whether it's our lack of a premise and how to develop it, whether it's getting them to the end, reinventing what we do, you know, to keep things fresh and not stale, whether it's transactional content versus kind of a more transformative experience, like all these ideas we're touching on, even the good hearts law stuff, like goals versus measures. I think it all rolls back to like one true north, like one goal that we all have as makers and marketers, which is make a difference. Like if you just think about that, it's like my goal is not to make some content. My goal is to make a difference. And if I just keep that in mind, I think it changes how we approach some of this work in the minutia, which is where creativity happens, by the way, but also in the larger conversations of like strategy discussions. Why are we doing this thing? And, you know, all that, the trend, or, you know, this person saying we should do it this way. Should we? Like, that's the first thing we say to our workshop students. It's, you're not here to make a podcast. You're here to make a difference. It just happens to be audio. It just happens to be a blog. It just happens to be your Twitter account. You're here to make a difference. Like, focus on that, and your goals might sound like flavors of that, and the rest tends to really snap into place. I'm not saying it happens automatically. It's still a ton of work, but you start thinking about different things. Like, instead of presenting a whole graphic, here's a spectrum with 4 parts left to right, you say, here's the experience spectrum. We're going to build it together. And that creates a form of tension. And it's also a way to like grip people, right? That tension of what are the parts? We're going to build it. But it's also like a way to make a difference, because it's a better way to teach. Like, you are kind of putting it together yourself in that article that you keep referencing. So what if we just switched our gear entirely from whatever the goal is you're thinking of? What if it's just one goal? Make stuff that makes a difference. That's it. What would change? I think a lot for the better.